Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining another episode of the Commons in Conversation, a series about the ways in which nonprofits and philanthropy are working together to knit together various divisions, social, cultural, political, that persist across the country. My name is Nandita Raghuram. I am the Deputy Opinion Editor at the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and today I'm talking to Tim Shriver, Chairman of Special Olympics International and co-creator of the Dignity Index. Launched in 2022, the Dignity Index rests on the premise that it's not disagreement that causes polarization in America, but what we do with that disagreement that matters in terms of creating and mitigating divides. So it holds that when you just disagree with someone, treating them with respect rather than contempt can make all the difference. With that in mind, it assigns a grade of sorts to speech by politicians and ordinary citizens, and divisive speech gets a low score, while respectful speech gets a high score. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today. I wanted to start off by asking you about the Charlie Kirk killing, which is a major event which to some might suggest that rhetoric can trigger violence. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think, look, the way I look at it, one person was responsible, as far as we know, for murdering Charlie Kirk. Unspeakable tragedy to see a young person be the victim of gun violence, be the victim of any kind of violence. Our country has a history of experiencing painful, sudden assassinations. And that history should remind us that it's a bad solution to a problem, to any problem. To use violence is not a healthy, successful, certainly not compassionate way to approach division. I think one person's responsible for his murder, as far as we know. I think all of us are responsible for trying to prevent future violence. And I think the one message we've learned over time is that the more we look at ourselves and the more we look at each other, we realize that we're all a part of this, what I'd call a contempt industrial complex. We're all weaving into this sort of vortex of contempt where it feels like to disagree with someone requires dehumanizing them and attacking them and labeling them and demonizing them. That seems to be the way to do it. And that gets reinforced by lots of likes on social media and lots of pickup by the traditional media and lots of excitement from our own crowd. Wow, you really got her on that one, Tim. Wow, you really gave him a zinger. That was so great, the way you really humiliated that other person. That's a dead end. That's a recipe for disaster. And I think that's what we're seeing in conflict right now as we try to wrestle with the implications of this terrible murder. Which path do we choose going forward? Do we collectively try to choose to treat each other with more dignity? Or do we collectively join this outrage complex that, I'm sorry to say, can lead to violence and will?
Yeah, and you said, only one person is responsible for the actual killing, but all of us are responsible for creating this environment. Some on the right are using this moment to perpetuate that the left is kind of guiltier of this, toxic rhetoric. Yeah. And I'm wondering what you think about that. Like, is it possible to assign fault to either side and measure whose speech is worse than another?
Well, here's what I can tell you. I've spoken to very, very red audiences about the Dignity Index. And here's what they say. They say, you're right. We should treat each other with dignity. But the other people won't do it, so we can't unilaterally disarm. And then I speak to very, very blue audiences. And they say, you're right. We should treat the other side with dignity. But we can't unilaterally disarm because the other side is so horrible. One woman said to me, I don't know what to tell you. I hate hateful people. And that was the signal insight to me. She hadn't heard that she had become what she loathes. When I look at the rhetoric on both sides here, the blaming and shaming of the other side, you're more responsible than we are. You started it. We know this from conflict throughout history. It doesn't so much matter who started it. It matters who finishes it, who's going to end it. So let's not have a contest as to who's been worse. That's a devil's game, and it's not going to lead us anywhere good. And no one's going to win. I'm sorry to say to my friends on the right, no, the blue side isn't worse in its use of contempt. And I'm sorry to say to my friends who are progressives, no, the red side isn't worse with contempt either. That's not morally making equivalent about the arguments, but it's trying to make a human equivalent about the call to dignity. We can argue about whether building a wall or having open borders is the more moral choice. That's fine. But demonizing or on 1,000 other issues, but demonizing the other side as though they're subhuman, demonic, contemptible, don't deserve to live in this country, that doesn't get you anywhere. In fact, it makes an enemy for your cause. So we're not really in a healthy discussion when we say who's worse. We're in a much healthier discussion when we say, how do we get better?
Yeah. And how much of this is kind of outside of our control? I think you, in other interviews, you've called this a surround sound of contempt, and you were just saying that there is this constant kind of barrage of dehumanization, name calling, toxic behavior. And I'm wondering, like, we're all participating in it, but is to some extent, is it outside of our control?
I don't think so. I mean, there's large forces at play that glorify and reward contempt. There's no question about that. But America is a country where, individual action and citizen empowerment and small groups of people, as Margaret Mead said many, many years ago, small groups of people change the world. So that's up to each of us to create a counterculture. In your faith-based institution, at your place of work. I don't think, Nandita, that you want to work at a place that's surrounding and where you're on tenterhooks all the time because you're going to be attacked if you say something that people disagree with. So you try to create a workplace that has a different set of values, where disagreement is allowed and in fact encouraged, and where that disagreement, when treated with dignity, actually produces new insights for both sides in the disagreement. So we want to create that in our families. We want to create that in our businesses. We want to create that in our civic organizations. I go to Lions Club's meetings. Nobody in the Lions Club wants to have hostility. So there's a whole culture of promoting common purpose. These are ways in which Americans can create I would almost call countercultures to the contempt industrial complex. And slowly over time, countercultures recognize in each other a common view, a common hope, a common connection, and they ultimately can create a new dominant culture. That's what we're hoping for. And I think most Americans, by far, the polling numbers suggest, when you ask people, do you like living in a country dominated by contempt? 70, 80% say no, I don't like it. And then you know what happens? You ask the next question, do you know what to do about it? And almost the same number, 70, say, no, I don't know what to do. Well, here's something you can do. Treat people you disagree with dignity. That's all. It's not complicated. Don't be nice or sweet or centrist if you're not a centrist. Stick to your principles, but add one. Treat other people with dignity. It will do much more to advance your principles, to have the other person hear you and feel that you've heard them, than it will be to demonize them.
Yeah, and I do have some questions about how to create this counterculture that you mentioned, but I did want to return back to something you said about the large forces at play contributing to this contempt. Most of the people watching work in philanthropy and nonprofits, and I'm wondering, like, would you say one of the forces contributing to this surround sound of contempt is philanthropy and nonprofits? And if so, like, how are they contributing to that in terms of their rhetoric, in terms of what they're putting out into the world? And one reason I ask this is because Trump recently pointed to some big foundations, Open Society and Ford, as funding protests that incite violence. So I'm wondering how you respond to this, that idea.
Yeah, look, I think there's a perception that the institutions on the other side are fomenting antagonism towards my side. The left thinks the same thing about the institutions on the right. I don't think it's a fair attack on philanthropy. I think there are many conservative philanthropists. There are many progressive philanthropists. They tend to fund things like mentoring programs and schools and healthcare programs and ways to educate young people and ways to protect the environment and ways to grow the participation of discriminated against populations in business and in culture and in higher education, those kinds of things. Those are not partisan. The vast majority of those programs are American in values. They treat people with, they promote freedom, they promote opportunity, economic opportunities of American value. So I don't think philanthropy is to blame for this by any means. I do think philanthropy is starting to recognize there's a new issue. Because if you look at most foundations, they say, well, we fund the arts, or we fund the environment, or we fund health, we fund education. Those are great, by the way. And I've been the beneficiary of many generous philanthropic donations over the course of my career. There's a new issue now in our country. It's how we treat each other. And I believe philanthropy is just awakening to the idea that this issue in and of itself needs dedicated resources and support. Some call it the bridging fields. Some call it the nonpartisan or pluralistic fields. In our view, we call it a dignity movement. These movements, I'm not saying fund us, although that would be great, but I am saying fund these organizations that are actively trying to understand both the science and the art of shifting culture. That's what's really at play right now. It's how do you change culture? And many philanthropic organizations have a lot of history with this and trying to change the culture around a lot of different challenges. This is a new one. And I think it's an existentially important one. So I hope philanthropy will respond over the next 5 to 10 years and build real commitments to these spaces and to the people leading in them.
And to solve these problems, you have to identify what's causing it, right? So do you have a sense of what is creating and what's contributing to this environment, the surround sound of contempt?
I think there's two explanations that are pretty reliable. The first is that we have this, I call the contempt industrial complex: partisan news, the algorithm, social media, and politics all operating together. It's a non-virtuous circle. Politicians say hateful things. Partisan news amplifies those things. The algorithm rewards those things with money and likes, and the circle and the cycle continues. That's one cause. So you might say, well, when did that start? Why is that happening? I think the second piece of the puzzle here is that we're in a period of enormously rapid change. And many of us, I would venture to say almost all of us, are a little scared about what's next. We don't quite understand. People my age get scared about technology, for instance. Younger people get scared about the future and about whether the country will hold up, whether it will see them, or people are concerned about whether our economic divides are going to destroy us, whether the environment's going to hold up. These are all very powerful concerns. And when change is scary, people draw inward. And when they sometimes draw inward, they lash out. And so we're all in a little bit of this tension, like, wait a minute, I'm not sure what's next. I need to stick to my group. Who's against us? Oh, maybe it's them. Let's get them. That whole mentality that surrounds periods of rapid change is also pretty well studied. It's not by me, but by other scholars much better than I am. And so it's worth recognizing when we see someone who really disagrees with us, they're struggling too right now. They're trying to make sense of what's going on right now. They might not feel so safe and secure either. And so sometimes just saying, tell me more. Where does your idea come from? Will reveal something quite tender in people. I found this quite a lot. I'm scared about the future. I don't know whether my family's going to be able to make it. I'm fearful that the faith that was handed on to me by my parents and grandparents isn't being respected. I don't know whether the earth itself, I'm scared to death. The earth might not make it. What do I do? So beneath these moments of, I'd say, lashing out and othering people is a kind of a tenderness, I think, that we would do well to recognize. So those are some of the ways in which we've seen patterns. And when we can disintermediate them, when we can get out of that contempt industrial complex, and more into our fears and the things we can do to satisfy and try to respond to them, we tend to have much, much more healthy conversations and find ourselves much closer to each other than we thought.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like you're saying, like, recognizing that everyone has some sort of fear that is giving them anxiety and kind of creating this contempt, right? And then that recognizing that can turn into having empathy for them and understanding, like, okay, something that one of their actions that I might perceive as, full of contempt or hateful, like, it's coming from a place of fear, and I can see the human beneath that.
Yeah. I mean, this is why it's a little bit of a spiritual crisis. I sometimes say that we're in a spiritual crisis. Maybe other people would prefer the term emotional crisis. There's just a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of uncertainty often breeds fear. And sometimes fear jumps quickly to hostility. before it gets processed. One of my mentors says, all great spirituality is about what you do with your pain. And in that sense, we're a country with lots of change going on, and it's creating, we're a little bit hurting. And that's okay. Everybody's life has hurt in it. But it's not so healthy to take our hurt and then try to pass it on to someone else and force someone else to hurt just because we hurt. It's a lot healthier to try to transform that hurt and that pain into some kind of collective or collaborative solidarity around it, and to try to find ways through it that way, in my view.
Yeah. And I mean, how do you escape it though? Because, a lot of like social media algorithms reward kind of fiery takes or like dehumanization essentially. And so how do you escape that when, most people are online, this is what they're seeing all the time, and this puts them more into their own little groups of people who think just like them, and others, the people who aren't like them. So how do you escape it in this world?
Well, I'm going to sound a little bit like maybe like almost childlike in my answer. I think you have to hold on to your light. We each have one. We each have an energy within us that is hopeful and light and open and loving. Take care of it. Everybody has a different way of doing that. I can't prescribe to you how to hold your center, how to hold your strength and your hopefulness best. I can suggest to you, though, that you think about that and that you work on it, and that if necessary, you practice it. Maybe it would have come naturally to others in prior generations to be able to feel hopeful. For us, it's now a required almost piece of practice. So I often ask people, what's your practice? What's your way of holding your hopeful energy? And people have extraordinary answers. One guy told me, well, I get up every morning and I laugh for 1 minute. Another person takes walks. Another person meditates. Another person writes letters to people that are part of his life, writes postcards. So people have different ways of holding the strength that is within each of us, and the hopefulness, and I dare say the love. Philanthropy is the work. Again, I'm going to go out on a limb here. It's the work of love. It's the work of the heart. So we have to hold on to that in some way. And when people bombard us and threaten us and make us feel silly because we're holding on to the work of the heart, schools of the heart are needed now to sustain our collective hopefulness. The one thing that America is not is a country of snark and cynicism. And if we become a country of snark and cynicism, I dare say the whole history of our country and the future of our country is at risk. We can't become a cynical nation. We've never been that. We've encountered terrible, terrible problems internally and externally over the course of our 250 years. But we have never given up on the idea that if we do this together, we can do it. That's the way I was raised as a kid. We can do this. Yes, it's big. Yes, it's tough. President Kennedy famously said, we're going to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And we've tried to bring peace to the world, not because it's easy, because it's hard. We've tried to create a country that has economic opportunity for all. It's not easy. Maybe we haven't done it yet, or we certainly haven't. So we got to get after that, but don't give up on trying.
You mentioned philanthropy. What are things that philanthropy should try? Like, what are some effective solutions that should be funded that you've seen, or nonprofit groups should pursue to kind of turn the temperature down on conversations? What have you seen working that philanthropy should devote its resources to?
Well, you've opened me up to being able to say the work I'm doing on the Dignity Index. I think, we're working with governors. We're working with kindergarten through 12th grade teachers and school systems. We're working with business leaders. Dignity works. We call it dignity politics. We call it faith-based leaders, faith in dignity. So, we've got a huge interest from leaders and from grassroots communities in changing the way we treat each other. Invest in that. It can be with us, but it can be with others also. There's many good people doing work in this space. There's many what we call bridging organizations. Braver Angels is one that a lot of people know about, doing a lot of work on college campuses. We're very closely collaborating with them. They need support. We created something called the Office of American Possibilities, just to bring Americans together across divides, to formulate new breakthrough ideas that could change the landscape of our civic and political life. And the OAP, the Office of American Possibilities, I think is a terrific idea. It's an incubator for creative solutions to America's toughest problems across political divides. So that's, I think, a very worthwhile cause. We've got a lot of work coming up around the 250th anniversary of our country. I'm working with several leading philanthropists and businesses and not-for-profit organizations. Why couldn't we create the biggest coalition ever? Really, the biggest coalition ever dedicated to the idea of strengthening the American spirit and restoring trust in ourselves and each other and in our country. That's a big idea. So I think that's worth investing into. I mean, I could go on and on. I think there's an enormously creative moment here, and I think philanthropy has a huge role to play in stimulating it. None of the things I've just described are going to be supported by government, and maybe that's appropriate. Will all depend on average citizens and people with means to invest in a kind of a transformative cultural and social energy. And I think it's out there, and I think it needs investment. So I hope people will consider that.
And then kind of looking to allow our listeners to look inwards a little bit, what should the philanthropic community do how should they change their own practices or their own rhetoric or their own statements to ensure they're not contributing to this environment of contempt? You talked about creating a counterculture that recognizes common hope. What can philanthropy do in terms of like the statements it puts out? The materials it puts out, how it talks about itself, how it talks to others, to ensure like the practices it's using are promoting dignity.
Okay, so I'll give you a 2-minute exercise any philanthropist can take. Take out the Dignity Index. I think there's a link to it on our site here. It's a single card. It has a 1 at the bottom and an 8 at the top and a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the middle. And then frame the way you speak about people you disagree with and score it. Don't tell anybody, just score yourself. Most people score themselves very low, and they're shocked. When we've done this with people, we've found that people naturally want to score higher. They want to use more dignity, right? So I would invite leaders who are issuing press releases or posting on social media or making statements on their websites or to their grantees or others. Try to look at that index and keep your speech at what we would call 5 and higher. A 5 is someone who just, at a minimum, says we each deserve equal time. And a 6 is someone who wants to explore and find common ground, more curious. A 7 has a higher degree of humility. I may not understand you, but I want to know where we disagree. And an 8 is the kind of person who treats you with dignity no matter what. We've seen this in history, Dr. King, and of course, many others. Philanthropists can take out that index. Anybody can do it. You don't need a PhD. You don't even need to be trained by me. Just open the index, score yourself, and then I would venture to ask, try to be 5 and up. Kevin Stitt, the governor of Oklahoma, asked all of his communications people, don't give me statements or speeches that aren't 5 and up. And I'm going to score them. I'm going to ask Tim and his team to score them. If we fall below 5, I'm going to tell you to change the language. It's not that complicated. We can all do it. It takes a shift, though. We have to recognize that most of us, I would dare say, certainly me, have been part of the problem. Each of us can be part of the solution.
And can you kind of walk through the scoring rubric that you use? And I guess a follow-up question I have to that is, have you seen any statements or practices from philanthropy that would score low on your scale? And what are some examples of something that would score low, and what are some examples of something that would score high?
Well, I don't have quotes right off the top of my head from philanthropy, but if you look at the index, if people pulled it up right now, it's very easy to look at. A 1, I can just tell you, a 1 is the language that says you don't deserve to live. You've sacrificed your license to operate. You're no longer human. I have to get rid of you. That's the language of violence. That's the language of genocide. That's the language of war. A 2 is pretty close. But is just a person who says you become evil. It's not it's not me versus you. It's me or you. One of us has to go. You got to be out of here. You're evil. A 3, a little bit more on the moral side. I'm good. You're bad. We're in a war, a culture war. It's us maybe against you. There's only going to be one winner here. And a 4 is I'm just a little better. It's our team is the good team. Your team is the bad team. Where you come from, they're all bad people, So those are the low scores. Those are the contempt scores. And almost every piece of speech can fall in that's hateful or contemptuous falls in that 1 up to 4 range. The 5, 6, 7, and 8 is where you start to hear, okay, Nandita, we don't agree on this, but you give your point of view and then I'll give mine. That's a 5. I think Nandita has a right to her opinion. That's a 5. A 6 is Nandita and I know we don't agree on this issue we're talking about, but I bet there's more we can learn about each other. And I bet there are places we agree. Maybe we both like the same sport, or we both like the same outdoor activity. We both like our moms or dads or brothers or sisters or whatever. We both are children of grandparents who influenced us, whatever. That we have a little common ground. That's a 6. As I said, when you hear 7, you often hear people say, Nandita, I don't agree with you at all on this, but I got to think about, help me to understand what I might be getting wrong. That's a 7. There's a humility there. You see this in great scriptural texts and great poetry and great politics. And an 8 is, even if you're a condemned prisoner on death row, I'm going to treat you with dignity. Nelson Mandela coming out of prison and having lunch with his jailer. You see this in Desmond Tutu. You see it in Dr. King. You see it in average America. You see it in people who love their teenagers, who are being vicious and cruel to them, and yet they love them nonetheless. I know you're being very disrespectful of me. You hear parents at least muttering under their breath sometimes. I know you're going through it here. I know you're not treating me well. I love you anyway. That's an 8. So these are, we've done social science on this. A person on the right scores these speech the same way a person on the left does. If you're thinking to yourself, those people are just such irritating jerks. They've just become evil. They're ruining the country. All you've done is attack the human being. You haven't challenged their ideas. So it's actually feels good in the short run to use that very contemptuous language, but it doesn't actually advance your cause. You haven't said why you think there should be open borders or a wall. You haven't said why you think the Second Amendment should be strengthened or weakened. You haven't said why you think schools should be funded or defunded. You've just said you hate the other person. Well, of course, what does that create? An enemy for your cause, because the other person now hates you. And so you may believe deeply in the importance of environmental protection. And what you've just done by dehumanizing the other person is make an enemy for the environment. Not good, not a good strategy. Doesn't work. So we encourage people to look at the index. It gives you kind of a little easy tool to use when you're thinking to yourself, what can I do? What can I do? I'm just one person. I'm just a teacher. I'm just a cop. I'm just a mom or a dad. I'm just a neighborhood person. I just run a small store. I just work at the convenience store. That's okay. You can treat everybody with dignity, and I promise you it will have an effect.
And so what comes next after the score? Like if a politician's speech score or, philanthropy leader speech scores low on the scale, how do you work to change it? What comes after that?
So we list on the back of the card, and if you're on the website, you can flip it over, skills, what we call from scoring to skills. How do you move up? How do you learn to listen more attentively? How do you become more curious and less furious? How do you acknowledge the knowledge of the other side? How do you regulate in the midst of a debate? These are all very well-researched skills that people can learn or just learn to practice on their own that make debate much more healthy. It makes violence less likely, it eases divisions, and it actually helps us solve problems when we use these skills in our disagreements. So part of what we do with our team to create what we're calling a dignity movement is to equip people with the skills necessary to bring dignity more to life in the course of disagreements. You know, we'd like to think that it comes naturally, but sometimes it's tough. You know, if you insult me deeply, insult something I believe in deeply, if you say something that to me feels hateful, it's hard for me to regulate. It's hard for me to listen. It's difficult for me to acknowledge that you might have some part of what you said might be, because my tendency is to lash out. How dare you? That's outrageous. You know, that tendency is within each of us. So this is a time when knowing how we score is the first step to developing the skills to be better in debate. You know, we like to say, look, we're a democracy. In a democracy, differences of opinion are not the problem. I mean, I like to say in a democracy, differences of opinion are the solution to problems. That's the way the whole system is set up. It's set up so that everybody gets to have an opinion. And the premise is that with everyone's opinion, we'll get better. You can't get there if the differences of opinion lead you to hate the other person. We don't have a democracy then, because we don't have debate. We just have attack. And that's the end of, I dare say, our system, if that becomes the norm. So the skills necessary to move up are what we train, you know, political or business leaders in. The business community loves this stuff. I mean, we didn't even design it for businesses, but businesses love it. They want to expand it. They want to train new employees so that employees come with the leadership. Many of the business leaders I talk to refer to dignity as a leadership skill, not just as a team building or a problem solving skill. How do you lead with dignity? You know, we're very excited about the potential this has and how many people are hungry for it.
That was my last question, a good note to end on. Before we sign off, Tim, I wanted to ask if there's anything you wanted to make sure our listeners knew about your work, where to find you, that sort of thing.
Well, thank you. I think the main thing is to listen to this kind of conversation. I hope people can stay the course. And, you know, we didn't attack each other and we didn't attack other people. And I didn't name some horrible philanthropist who I really want to drag through the mud. You know, that probably would be a little more salacious and a little bit more captivating on social media. But these kinds of conversations, for me at least, are very healing and very hopeful. I was talking to a friend this morning who's a very significant philanthropist. I said, you know, are you hopeful? And she said, yes, I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful. I see what's going on in local communities. I see what's going on when people work together. I see what happens when people break bread. And it's, you know, giving me such a sense of hope. I hope these conversations give us all a sense of hope. The status of our relationships in our country may seem badly damaged. And at times I'm sorry to say they are. But just as the damage is visible, so too is the goodness and the hopefulness and the possibility. And, you know, I was raised to believe in that, and I still do. And I'm grateful that others are joining me and joining so many other organizations around the country and trying to lay the groundwork for a new awakening of the American spirit. So I'm very thankful.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for talking this through with me. Thank you, everyone, for joining the conversation. We hope you tune into future episodes of Commons and Conversations, and definitely visit the Commons online at philanthropy.com/thecommons. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.